Welcome, listeners. First of all, I wish to begin by apologizing for my prolonged absence this year. It's been a while since I posted a new podcast, and teaching at the university has been all consuming this year, unfortunately. So I hope to greet you with more regular updates on my philosophical thoughts in future. Now, one of the listeners brought to my attention the topic of today's episode, and from my research, into the topic, it seems like it's not widely explored, though it is highly topical. So, in this episode, we will explore the decline of practical reason and the rise of a culture of corporatocracy. So, in the first part of this podcast, we'll begin by getting a sense of what it means when we talk about the decline of practical reason. And in the second half of the podcast, we'll explore the prevailing framework in the modern day, which is a culture of corporatocracy. So, just to give you some background information to begin, we're witnessing a phenomenon that scholars across various disciplines like theology, philosophy, sociology, and anthropology have identified as a postmodern cultural crisis, and it's called a crisis of reason. Now, this is a unique period or episode in human history where reason itself is under scrutiny. So, during the 18th and 19th century, the Age of Enlightenment brought about a robust faith in rationalism and legal positivism came very in quick succession. So, the belief in the potential human rational thinking came hand in hand with a staunch commitment to meritocracy. So these eras were marked by a significant shift away from superstition and unquestioned beliefs, embracing a new confidence in human reason and epistemological process. And the period of optimism, often referred to as La Belle Époque, the beautiful age, comes to an abrupt end with the onset of World War One, followed by the rise of communism, the Great Depression, economically, and the horrors of World War II, of course. Now, these catastrophic events led to a profound social and philosophical reaction. People began to question the very foundations of human reason. If reason could engineer such morally repugnant atrocities, then how could we trust it? So we collectively responded from a place of fear and scapegoat the very thing that could help us the most, unfortunately, and that was practical reason. So, ironically, it was our overestimation of human reason in the first place that in some ways contributed to its own downfall. Along the way, we seem to have forgotten that rationality is not a single aspect of our cognitive abilities, that in fact it coexists with a lot of human things like fear, resentment, and delusion. Especially the false belief in the fact that we are always in control. Now, the integrity of reason was sidelined for a wholesale embracing of a singular belief in a subjective source of truth. So, the demise of practical reason in some ways gave way to belief in human subjective truth, which is very odd. So, in this way, the disillusionment in practical reason has a self given rise to irrationalism and subjectivism in philosophy, which is encapsulated in the postmodern movement. So, what follows modernity is postmodernity. Postmodernism has effectively diminished the role of reason and reduced it to a mere technical and managerial tool. And we'll explore this further along in this video. Stripping it of its broader potential to address the human crisis. And this reduction has turned reason into a character of itself, unable to fulfill its promise of guiding humanity through these challenging times, stripping it of its moral potential, in fact. So, in this episode, we'll delve deeper into how the shift has impacted on our culture and what it means for the future of human thought and society. So stay tuned as we unravel the intricate relationship between reason, irrationalism, and the managerial mindset that dominates the modern world. So, in this segment, we begin by examining the concept of practical reason within natural law theory and its significance in our present discussion, our present predicament. so to speak. Natural law theories offer a broad perspective on reason, contrasting sharply with the modern goal-oriented view that reduces reason to a mere tool. So classical natural law theory, especially as articulated by Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, posited that reason enables us to identify and pursue self-evident goods. Now, the foundational principle here is quite straightforward. Good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. So according to natural law theory, human life should be directed towards intrinsic goods, values that are fundamentally worthwhile in themselves, given the nature that we have, and not merely as instrumental means to other ends. Okay, so these values are not instrumental, they are incommensurate, meaning that they can't be compared or substituted by any other. And despite variations in the specifics, there's a consensus in natural law theory that these values are objectively good based on human nature, so the nature we have. Crucially, these fundamental values are self-evident and intuitively recognizable by all. So it's universally able to be discerned by anyone with a human nature. Practical reason plays two essential roles in this context. The first is that it allows us epistemological access. That is, it allows us to perceive and understand objective values as inherently good. So it allows us to identify the objective values. Second, it is the bedrock for moral agency. That is, it provides us with the capacity to discern these goods and align our actions with them. So this is action-oriented practical reasoning. It ensures that we engage with these values appropriately in real-life situations. So according to this view, practical reason isn't merely a tool. It's the foundation of moral agency, which guides us towards a purposeful moral trajectory. And it means every person is morally accountable for their actions, as failing to pursue objective goods results from a lapse in judgment. So practical reason is integral to moral deliberation in natural law theory. It's the innate ability that every one of us possesses that connects us to the self-evident values and holds us accountable to moral standards. This relationship between what we value and our self-perception is thus inseparable. Natural law asserts that these intrinsic values are inherently worthwhile for humans to pursue, and that pursuing them aligns with our human nature and our moral agency. So as moral agents, humans as individuals can make significant changes in their lives by rationally understanding and committing to intrinsic values. This dynamic process of moral deliberation is both diachronic, so it occurs over a period of time through repeated actions in response to specific situations, as well as being holistic. So it involves experiential wisdom, rational capabilities, and conscience. The Aristotelian scholar Alistair MacIntyre emphasized the holistic approach in his interpretation of Aristotle's moral theory. According to Aristotle, a moral agent is more than the sum of their parts, integrating various abilities in the pursuit of what is good. Our understanding of our role as moral agents is thus complex and multifaceted. We naturally grasp our status as moral beings, and this understanding shapes who we are. So over time, through our lifetimes, what we engage in every situation shapes who we are as individuals. MacIntyre concludes that morality is thus a practice, and that practical reason is how we engage in that practice. Practical reason in natural law theory is not just a tool, but a fundamental aspect of our moral identity. It allows us to recognize and pursue the intrinsic goods, making meaningful changes through rational deliberation and commitment to these values. This comprehensive view of moral agency underscores our capacity for continuous moral growth and understanding. So, all right, in this third segment, we go on to examine how the rise of naturalism has contributed to the conflation of objective phenomena and subjective perception, which significantly impacts our understanding of conscience and moral agency. And I previously this year, finished an article on this very topic, and it was published recently, and I'll link it beneath this video. So let's start with Immanuel Kant's theory of pure reason. Now, Kant's philosophy distinguished between what we can know through pure reason and what lies beyond our empirical understanding. And this distinction influenced the development of positivism, which asserts that the source of law and knowledge comes from empirical normative ends. So we begin with the ends rather than starting with the first premise, which is practical reason through the self-evident values. So now let's explore the differences between natural law and naturalism. So they sound similar, but they are very different. So let's discuss these two schools of thought and highlight the chasm between traditional and secular ontological foundations. The ontological foundation is a theory of what things are, or the theory of being. Naturalism often gets confused with natural law, but they rest on very different assumptions about human nature. Naturalism, first, views human nature as part of the natural world, but it selectively determines which aspects of human life fall within naturally occurring phenomena. This creates a dichotomy between natural phenomena and subjective experiences, often portraying these two elements as being entirely separate. Essentially, naturalism falsely separates an anthropological account of human nature from its metaphysical characteristics and subsumes both within a purely descriptive framework of value. And what I mean here by descriptive is descriptive elements are observational. So the nature of things as we can describe them, right? So if I give you an example, a theory of law that is descriptive is one that is value free, and it describes the law as it presently manifests itself in the world, or it can be normative. So a theory of law that is normative is one that aligns with objective values in order to attain a sense of legitimacy of law. So these two aspects of law are different. For example, naturalism considers certain human behaviors and characteristics as natural phenomena arising from their status as subjects rather than agents. Philosopher Charles Taylor describes these as subject-related phenomena where it is deemed real or natural, excludes human experiences unless they can be explained through biology, chemistry, or physiology. As a result, intangible aspects like thoughts, motivations, values, and beliefs are relegated to a value-free ephemeral realm, disconnected from objective study. So basically, naturalism considers only scientific aspects of human nature to be relevant to the discussion of what is considered to be phenomena. And they're subject related, so they don't have any agency in and of themselves. And this disconnects them from an ability to study them objectively. So it's value-free, descriptive, wholesale human nature that does not have the artificial dichotomy between the natural world and human cognition creates a disjuncture between the objective values that exist in nature and the meanings we perceive in our minds, right? So this kind of separation means that objective values exist in the world as they are, human nature, and the things that we perceive through our minds metaphysically. Normativity is thus seen as existing only in our heads, while objectivity is kind of circumscribed to a descriptive realm. This false division diminishes our ability to discern and commit to intrinsic goods as moral agents. So it severs the relationship between us and self-evident value, reducing us to mere subjects whose experiences are subjective. So to illustrate this point, C.S. Lewis, in his pedagogical work, The Abolition of Man, provides a powerful analogy. He describes a scenario where a group encounters a beautiful waterfall. One person struck by the beauty of the scene calls it sublime, while his friend in the team disagrees, finding no beauty in it at all. Now, Lewis argues that beauty can be an objective value and exists independently of personal preference. Therefore, the person who fails to recognize the waterfall's beauty is mistaken, as they miss an objective value. It's not simply a subjective opinion, they are incorrect in their value judgment. Similarly, consider a situation where something terrible happens to a vulnerable person, like a child. any reasonable observer would conclude that an objectively wrong act had occurred. Charles Taylor argues that moral meanings are not mere projections onto a neutral world, but reveal something essential about objective value. And both Taylor and Lewis here are warning us against the dangers of pure subjectivism, emphasizing that our subjective experiences must align with objective values in order to be valid or legitimate, as in the same way as a normative theory of law determines that insofar as it aligns with objective value of what is a good law in order for it to be legitimate. So, in our postmodern culture, moral meanings are often seen as detached from the natural world and exist only within our human lived experiences. So, by breaking the connection between subjective experiences and the objective world, naturalism severs the link between practical reason and objective reality. And the false dichotomy conflates individual authenticity with subjective perceptions, which may not necessarily be anchored to an objective reality. In conclusion, what happens when there is this rise of naturalism and the conflation of objective phenomena with subjective perceptions? The consequence is profound for our understanding of conscience and moral agency. By reducing moral meanings to subjective experiences, we risk losing our ability to engage with intrinsic values and uphold the value of practical reason. This episode highlights, thus, the importance of recognizing and preserving the connection between our subjective experiences and the objective values in this world in order to maintain our moral agency and regain our sense of practical reason. So, we now turn to explore how the interplay of these different ideas have impacted on our contemporary culture, particularly in the rise of corporate culture. So we'll discuss here the significant consequences that arise when we disengage from or distort or deny practical reason. Now, practical reason is the inherent mechanism by which we access and pursue the goods. And if this reason both allows us to engage in worthwhile ways with the good and direct us over our lifetime to lead a good life, then what happens when we lose touch with the essential aspect of our cognitive toolkit? Now, the subjective framework reduces our understanding of moral agency, but we remain, in Aristotelian terms, political animals. So that's a descriptive aspect of our beings. We continue to live in communities, we're driven by market and political forces, where power dynamics and equalities and scarcity persist. So in today's world, many people feel exempt from intellectual influences, yet they are deeply affected by those who continually perpetuate flawed ideas. In a culture where corporatocracy prevails, this has led to the emergence of individuals being beholden to corporate virtue. And corporatocracy, the definition of that, is a society or a political system that is regulated or defined by corporates. Okay. So historically, Greek and medieval thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, who were natural lawyers as well, focused on the conditions necessary for human flourishing. They believed in creating environments where individuals could pursue the common good using their unique talents. So in a time of aristocracy, Plato in particular was centuries ahead of his time, revealing progressive Enlightenment ideas of meritocracy. So in the Republic, one of his seminal works on political theory, Plato posits the idea of the philosopher king. A king ought to be chosen from among the class of persons he deemed gold class. Now, silver class, by contrast, were those citizens who were protectors of the realm, of society, auxiliaries or soldiers, and the bronze class described those class or members of society who were responsible for producing goods. So this meritocratic framework, premised on the fact that each individual be awarded according to one's talent, has now been replaced by a socialist one based on naturalism. So in the meritocratic era, political frameworks envisaged that individuals playing their part with engaging with practical reason, the ones who were able to do it more effectively did so with their eye to human flourishing, a collective worthwhile end. Now, today, this has been supplanted by the enterprise firm. The managerial task now involves synthesizing various ends and data to achieve the firm's goal, while aligning with the subjective aims of its members. In this environment, practical reason is reduced to a managerial skill, focusing on the technical aspects of assessing validity and feasibility. Reason, aim, is to control outcomes to suit the key aspirations of the enterprise, which is often labeled as core values. And these core values go beyond the basic meritocratic value like integrity, accountability, and fairness, and begin to reflect the ideological views of the privileged few at the top of the management hierarchy. Ironically, the underlying logic of this framework is instrumental and utilitarian, viewing humans as always calculating the costs and benefits of their actions, inherently self-serving and unable to trust others. It is a centralized system of values, putting the interest of the corporate ahead of the interests of its workers. Individualism is lost in corporate value and only important insofar as it has measurable worth to the corporate virtue box-ticking exercises. It is ultimately aimed at controlling the workers in ways that are conducive for the corporation's objectives, okay? So in this context, management today is about coordinating ends effectively on behalf of the corporation, could be board of directors, and often reduces human interaction to measurable outcomes that can be controlled. The utilitarian approach diminishes the richer, more nuanced role of practical reason as envisaged by classical thinkers. We had aristocracy before meritocracy, and today we have corporatocracy. The focus is outcome-oriented and not process-related, and the processes only have value insofar as they contribute to the overall image projection, which is in the interests of the present cultural milieu. So we can end today's podcast on a rather sobering note. The disaffection with reason has had profound consequences for society. It has led to a reductive view of moral agency where reason has been caricatured to be merely utilized as a managerial tool. The shift undermines our ability to engage meaningfully with intrinsic values and pursue a fulfilling life in accordance with the processes of practical reason. Now, in the previous video, I discussed the implications of a positive mindset where the validity of law is in their source. Now, there is no need in this, according to this legal theory, to go beyond the source of power to determine whether a law is legitimate. This kind of thinking lurks in the backdrop today, where there has been a significant shift from the objective value of things to the subjective meaning of the thing because it is manifesting in that way. Because a person thinks this way, it must be true. In this context, the rise of what is referred to as corporatocracy is not particularly surprising. Corporate culture helps organizations bind workers together towards a shared aim. In a context where there is utility focus over process and the ideologies of the privileged few over individual merit, the consequences can be alarmingly counterproductive. As C.S. Lewis once presciently stated in his book on the abolition of man, on pedagogy, we make men without chests and expect from them virtue and enterprise. Facilitated by a reductive kind of reason, which is merely instrumental logic, this situation has the effect of reducing human interactions to calculable, controllable elements. This is unsustainable in the long term, even for capital growth or worker productivity, but also for creating a society full of moral people who aim for the common good. The challenge for us in the future will be as follows. We have to challenge subjective reason that emerges in the guise of tolerance and kindness. By attempting to understand and address aspects of corporatocracy through small justices, this is the only way we can begin to work towards reclaiming the true potential of practical reason and moral purpose in our lives. Thank you very much for joining me for this podcast. I hope to revisit you with another glimpse into the mind of a jurisprud.